Frank Soriano was having a streak of really bad luck. His F-150 had a bad muffler, but he wasn't too concerned. He had the knowledge to fix it himself, so he laid down on the ground of a truck stop, got underneath the truck body just a tad, and got to work. Unfortunately, it was tough to spot the man flat on the ground, especially for the driver of an 18-wheel semi-truck. The driver pulled into the lot, ready for a little rest, but rest wasn't what was waiting for him. He felt himself lift into the air. At the same time, he heard a nauseating, juicy crunch, followed by a blood-curdling scream. He ran over Frank Soriano's abdomen, 70,000 pounds in all. It completely severed the man in half, but he was still alive. I'd call it a miracle, but his soul-piercing scream said otherwise. At least 3 people witnessed the horrifying sight of the man sliced in two, flattened on each severed end, crying in agony. This was far worse than any horror movie. How was he alive? Well, the gripping tire and all of the weight completely flattened his tissue, which helped limit the flow of blood. It felt like hours before rescue arrived, but Frank's luck wasn't about to turn around. Each half was loaded into separate ambulances and transported to 2 different hospitals miles apart. Frank died, but not for 3.5 hours of chart-topping horror. He honestly likely wouldn't have survived regardless, but you never know. You imagine driving over a bridge that stands near 150 feet tall in a torrential rainstorm, only to feel a violent rumble explode from your toes to your knees. Before you can run scenarios, an eerie groan turns to the loudest crackle you've ever heard. Your stomach damn near leaps up your throat as your entire car plummets as if hell itself is pulling you down. You are powerless. Seconds feel like a slice of forever as you clench your fists and eyes, hoping you'll wake in bed. That's exactly what happened on August 14, 2018 in Genoa, Italy. A huge stretch spanning 690 feet of the Morandi Bridge completely buckled. Few who were lucky enough to survive have claimed that lightning struck the concrete cable bridge just before it viciously broke apart, causing a massive avalanche of vehicles and wreckage. A man working beneath was found completely crushed by heavy, jagged chunks of asphalt. As for the people on that stretch of bridge, most free fell with their vehicles an average of 148 feet. The lucky ones died on impact the moment that they struck either the hard earth or swelling Polcevera River. If not, they likely endured a pelting storm of rock-hard debris. Miraculously, a few people survived that horrid drop, but still received a range of injuries, and some were life-altering. There were homes beneath that bridge completely leveled. By the following day, 12 residents were missing, and voices could still be heard calling from within the rubble. This was the 11th major bridge collapse in Italy in a 5-year span. In the end, 43 people were killed and 600 displaced from homes. It shed light on the safety of bridges in Europe. Committees were appointed and new steps taken to prevent this from ever happening again. If you enjoy tuna fish Sammy's using Bumblebee canned tuna, you might want to skip. I'm about to destroy your lunch hopes and dreams. Where in the world is Jose Molina? That's what his coworkers were asking on that grim day in October 2012. The 62-year-old factory worker wasn't in the break room grabbing a snack or in the restroom. His car remained in the lot. The hard worker wasn't known to vanish in hopes of grabbing a midday nap. A call of his name on the intercom didn't produce his whereabouts either. Employees fanned out in all directions, searching high and low. Eventually, every single area was searched. All but one, that is. The 36-foot-long industrial oven was the last place, literally, that anybody thought of, and it was on. Rows and rows of large containers of shredded tuna had already been packed inside. It was fired up at 270 degrees Fahrenheit for easily the past 2 hours. The power was killed, but nobody could enter for 30 minutes while it cooled down. Once it did, the door was opened, revealing the unthinkable. There he was, collapsed, lifeless, covered in bubbling, oozy thermal wounds, lying next to his hard hat and shriveled disposable mask. He had entered that hellhole to try and fix a component inside. Careless coworkers failed to search the area before shoving in the tuna, sealing it up, and cranking the heat. His autopsy revealed that he died one of the worst deaths possible. Not from suffocation or carbon monoxide poisoning, he died as a result of direct thermal injuries. It wasn't quick or forgiving in any way. He likely lived that nightmare for anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, possibly even longer. It all depends on how long it took for the oven to reach a high heat. Can you imagine slow cooking from the outside in, all while smelling 12,000 pounds of cooking tuna? The company has promised that they discarded every ounce of that tuna, all while trying to dodge a hefty fine. When I found this headline, I thought there's no way that this is real, but truth is stranger than fiction. This freak tragedy didn't just claim 1 life or 2, but 3. It took place on a breathtaking family-run vineyard in Italy in 1987. They grew rows and rows of grapes to harvest and ferment. Unfortunately, they underestimated the dangers of this occupation. In order to produce large batches of wine, a good ventilation system is key. This is due to the fact that the fermentation process produces carbon dioxide. Additionally, you can become impaired from just the alcohol fumes and rapidly. One person was attempting to stir a jumbo vat of fermenting grape juice. He became nauseous and oh so woozy, falling into the deep, sticky fluid. At first he tried to flail, but his head felt like it was going to pop and his muscles began to seize up. Another family member noticed the commotion and sprung to action, but he too was struck with blankets of haze. He tried to lean over to grab hold of the drowning man, but gave in to gravity, making a large splash into the juice. Finally, a third family member attempted to launch a rescue. She tried to do her best to save the men, but breathed in the same dangerous vapors. It was like a devastating game of dominoes. Soon, she was the last body to desperately kick and fight, but it wasn't long before she drowned too. By the time rescue arrived, it was long too late. All three had died after aspirating big gulps of wine into their lungs. The presence of carbon dioxide likely accelerated the effects of drowning. Hal worked for a sanitation company that was contracted out to provide services for industrial factories. One such place was an Oregon-based meat packaging facility. Little did Hal know that this particular place had a bad reputation for failing to follow protocol. One night, Hal and his crew were assigned to this facility, each member given a different task. His task was to clean a large meat blender. This didn't worry him. He was told time and time again that all machines were locked and properly covered. He got up on a stepladder, bent over the opening, and began cleaning. Suddenly, he was straight startled by an ear-aching, thundering metal-on-metal sound. It was screeching, whirling, and buzzing all around him. Something tripped the machine, turning it on. The startle tragically sent him tumbling right into the blender. Another employee nearby was also startled by the abrupt sound. He approached the blender, but as he got closer, he realized it wasn't just the machine he was hearing. There were gut-wrenching, animalistic, blood-curdling screams emanating from inside. He slammed the emergency stop button, but it was too late. Hal was no longer whole. His pieces were entangled in the rotating blades that were just now slowing to a stop. It looked like an explosion of mangled bone, brain matter, and bits of soft tissue. It only took seconds for him to transform from a screaming man to basically inside out. First responders had to have the entire machine taken apart in order to retrieve majority of his body, and it took nearly 12 hours. This is easily one of the most horrific deaths ever suffered. In 1942, something unimaginable occurred in a coal mine in China. This mine was once operated jointly by China and Japan, but Japan slowly gained full control. As a result, laborers were captured and forced to work in terrible conditions. Food was scarce, supplies were faulty, and shoes worn out and often the wrong size. On April 26, a huge gas explosion rang out from one of the shafts. Instead of launching a rescue, guards barricaded the opening. Terrified loved ones who rushed to the scene were shoved away. What was going on inside would exceed your worst nightmares. The mine began to cave in around the men as a fire raged. Workers desperately searched for an area free from flames, but soon there was no such place. Officials decided to completely seal up the mine in hopes of starving the fire of oxygen. This ensured that nobody would be coming out alive from that hellhole. Can you imagine the panic as dirt and rocks smash into you and your flesh shrivels, splits, and weeps? Every nerve is squealing in sizzling pain. You can't draw in a deep breath. You know it's the end, but your body keeps fighting. In total, this disaster killed 1,549 miners. This is a nightmare. When workers fall into a silo with flowing grains or soybeans, they can sink to the bottom. Just 1 foot of grain can offer 300 pounds of crushing, suffocating pressure. Once all the way under, you can find yourself beneath dozens to hundreds of tons. That's exactly what happened to the man in this video. It was just another day of work. He was helping to unload soybeans into the silo when catastrophe struck. One moment you could see him, and the next, he was gone. By the time rescue arrived, there was no sign of life, no subtle movement to indicate that he was conscious or alive, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't. Depending on what you are trapped in, your ability to move can be seriously compromised. Just imagine the horror. Every muscle in your body is squealing in agony. There's an immense squeezing fire as every inch cramps and aches. Panic swirls around in your head as you realize that you can barely breathe. All of that pressure is preventing your chest from expanding. In fact, the first time that you suck in air, soybeans will push hard against your chest wall. And now there's no room. You are completely entombed. It took rescue 10 hours to reach him. It was such a tricky effort that they had to call in other agencies to assist, and it was long too late. It's unclear how long he was alive, but people have survived for several hours while trapped before. Sadly, around 3/4 of all rescues end up being body recoveries.